And now, live from Smoke on the Water in Greenville's West End, here is Straight Up with Sturge with Mark Sturgis.
All right, welcome back in. 8:24 on this Hump Day edition, Wednesday edition of Straight Up with Sturge. Mark Sturgis, Price Atkinson, Donna back at the station, keeping us up and on the air and out of trouble and everything else that we put her through. So maybe we can get somebody else in trouble tonight. Let's bring on Rachal Bachman, college football writer, college basketball writer, and really all things pertinent when it comes to the NCAA with the Wall Street Journal. Rachel, how we doing tonight?
I'm great. How are you, Mark?
Fantastic. Sitting here with your buddy Price Atkinson, talking a little bit of football. You know, it blows me away that we're kind of having Throwback Wednesday night, and the fact we caught up with Bo Bounds in the last hour. Hadn't talked to right since after SEC Media Days back at the beginning of August. Kind of the same thing with you before the season when all the Johnny Manziel stuff was going on. So let's start right there with somebody that you put a lot of time and attention into with Johnny Manziel. Rachel, what have you thought about what he's brought to the table so far this year, both on and off the field for Texas A&M?
Well, I think on the field, he's been almost even better than he was last year. I mean, I believe he still has a higher completion rate than he did last year. His interceptions are up a little bit, but, you know, he's still making huge plays. He's still driving that offense, still making plays with his feet. And I think off the field, A&M has done an expert job of kind of keeping him within himself. And, you know, he's not tweeting. He's not acting up lately anyway. And I think that's made a big difference. I think that, you know, you're not hearing about some of the things you heard about in the summer with him sort of showing up at parties and tweeting things and getting into it with fans and things like that. And I think it's shown on the field. I think that the biggest thing hurting A&M now, of course, is just, you know, their defense. And if that were in place, this would be an extremely scary team with, you know, an improved Johnny Manziel running the show.
I feel like, Rachel, the irony, Price Atkinson sitting with Mark, I feel like the irony is just dripping off Johnny Manziel, because when we had you on in mid-August, you know, I don't think anybody outside of maybe a few people really believed truly that he would be in New York, not as a former Heisman winner in December, but as one of the finalists this year. But right now, as it looks like, I think all the handicapping, I don't think there's any way that this guy does not make it to New York as a finalist. And, you know, like you mentioned, I think that what he's doing on the field is incredible compared to last year. But like last year, to me, the more irony is everything he did last year was just oohed and awed over. But even like what he did last Saturday when he played with a bum shoulder, just gutted it out and put together an outstanding game, it doesn't seem like anybody's talking about it.
That's true, and I think it's partly because A&M's dropped a couple games, so it would take a few things for them to get back in the national title race. That's one thing. But you know, yeah, I think you're right. I think he's a legitimate candidate. He's he's in the top 5 in all the betting odds lists that I've seen, and you know, those guys in Vegas are very often right. I think what it's going to come down to is just what voters think of him personally, and that's a huge issue. And then number 2, you know, A&M really has to keep winning. Heisman voters are really historically biased in favor of winning teams. It's pretty rare for a team with 3 or 4 losses to have a Heisman candidate, especially a legitimate one. And so I think that's kind of the key hidden secret for him. And then also, you know, just making sure that sort of anti-Johnny off-the-field feeling doesn't bubble to the surface again and cause people not to vote for him.
Well, let's segue. That's a great segue into taking a look at the BCS and national championship pictures. We're sitting here today, heading into the last weekend here of October, actually beginning of November. You know, it looks like, I mean, on paper, I mean, everybody's still talking about Alabama and Oregon potentially on a collision course, with Florida State kind of still that hot, juicy pick right now with what they did locally here at Clemson, and then, you know, what they did obviously last weekend too. But, you know, as we're sitting here looking at it, is where it stands right now, you know, I mean, do you still seeing maybe about Alabama-Oregon championship game, if everything continues to play out? And do you think Florida State and Ohio State are going to need Notre Dame-like help this year to possibly squeeze into that game?
I think they will. If Alabama and Oregon win out, I mean, they've got tougher schedules easily. They both would potentially face pretty tough conference championships games, and they're playing a couple of ranked teams. So, if they win those games, they're absolutely in the title game. I can't think of a scenario where they wouldn't be. Florida State really does not have a lot on the schedule the rest of the season. I mean, Saturday is really it. I think it's the last ranked team they're scheduled to play unless something really changes with the teams they're playing down the road. They might face Miami again in the SEC title game. But the funny thing about that game is, Florida State is a heavy, heavy favorite against Miami. I think it was 21 points was the last line that I saw. And these two top 10 teams. So that tells you what, a gulf there is between those top four teams and the rest of FBS, at least perception-wise. I think that's something that, just underscores how good Oregon and Alabama are this year, that they're maybe even another level above, Florida State and Ohio State.
We're talking with Rachal Bachman, college football writer, basketball writer, and more when it comes to the NCAA with the Wall Street Journal. Plus Price, one of the absolute best Twitter handles out there in Bach Score. That's BACH Score. Real close to Bach Score there, Rachel. But listen, you're talking about this BCS title game. I think what we're wanting to see nationally is a push for Alabama, Oregon. But that being said, there's still 6 weeks of this football season left. And it's the final year of the BCS, so we might as well go out in just an absolute chaotic mess. But I can already hear the whining coming out of Columbus, Ohio right now. If Ohio State goes 25-0 in Urban Meyer's first 2 seasons there at Ohio State, and they don't sniff the title game in either one of those years, one of them was done because of their poor decision to go to a bowl game at 6-6 just a couple of years ago.
Right. That's true. And some people now say that was a huge mistake not taking the punishment that year instead of waiting a year. But yeah, that would be astounding and definitely unprecedented in the BCS era for a team to go undefeated 2 years and not play in the title game. But it's partly the Buckeyes' fault. I mean, even fans I've seen kind of lamenting this on their own message boards are pointing out how weak the schedule is. And the non-conference schedule was relatively ridiculous. I mean, it's just too easy for a team that really wanted to make a push for the national title. And then the way the Big Ten's breaking this year is just not a very impressive conference. And so I think the only ranked team Ohio State has left on its schedule is Michigan, which has no guarantee of being ranked by the time Ohio State plays them. So, and even if they play in the Big Ten championship, I mean, I don't know if that is going to be on par with, maybe even the SEC championship in terms of difficulty. So, that could be a very bitter pill for the Buckeyes to swallow. But, besides the Big Ten portion, which was out of their control, they could have controlled this with maybe one marquee non-conference game.
And a team that's kind of on the outside that's starting to creep up on the radar, I think, a little bit is Baylor with the meat of their schedule coming up. I mean, you can't turn your head away from what Art Briles and Bryce Petty and that offense are putting up for the Bears. I mean, obviously they have a very difficult road ahead of them, depending on what shakes out with them. But I wanted to ask you, Rachel, also, as we're talking about the BCS, I want to get your thoughts on the new selection committee, that has been announced for next year and the new +1, 4-team playoff, so to speak. What are your thoughts on that? I've talked with Mark even earlier tonight. I've just been against this whole thing. I really think that the BCS system, keeping the BCS, letting the computers pick the 4 teams instead of having that subjective human element into it, I just think it's just opened a very big box that I think is going to be really dangerous to get into. But what are your thoughts on this way, the new system coming in for next year in the committee?
Well, that's a really interesting point you make about using the BCS system for the playoff in the first year. I hadn't heard that before, but that's an interesting idea. I think that there's a real irony to the fact that we're returning to an all-human decision-making body for the title, because that's exactly what people were criticizing in the previous yes.
Thank you.
Right? It's lunacy to decide a champion with a vote, essentially, or a couple of votes, the AP poll and the coaches poll. But here we are. I mean, what are we going to do? We're essentially going to pick the final 4 teams with a vote, with a consensus, decision from this 13-member committee. So, I think that just shows how difficult it is to pick from 125 teams the best 4 when you only have a 12-game regular season, and in most cases, very few common opponents, if any. How do you compare these teams in this season where there's a bunch of undefeated teams still now? Who's to say that Oregon's better than Baylor, or Alabama's better than Ohio State? I mean, who's to judge that? We don't really know that. So I do think it's funny that we're going back to humans, and frankly, I think that they'll have so much pressure to not be biased that I think that they'll probably make as good a decision as they can. I don't have any problem with who was selected for the committee. I think it's just an inherently really difficult job because of what I mentioned. There's so few common opponents. Unlike college basketball, where there's all these games and all this data that you can look at, and frankly, a lot of room to fudge because you can pick 68 teams for the tournament instead of 4. College football doesn't have that, and that is going to make this committee's job very difficult, regardless of who's on it.
Yeah, and Rachel, to further that point, I think the worst case scenario for that committee is a year that they have to sit in there and judge people's losses. Who had the best loss to finish out rolling out that 4, and that's when the human element really comes in. Real quickly, because you're really on touch of everything when the NCAA is involved, Rachel. I think we all agree that we're about to see a new governance structure come out. Price and I talked about it in the last segment, that 2 athletic directors, one from Purdue and one from Missouri, were actually in Indianapolis yesterday meeting with Mark Emmert, trying to get back the athletic directors having a say in the policy making of the NCAA and eliminating the presidents from that decision making. Ultimately, do you not think that's the right move to make because it's the ADs that are involved with these departments on a day-to-day basis?
That's a really tough call, and that's another thing that's been cyclical throughout the history of college sports. It was, I think, about 15 years ago that there was this big movement to bring in the presidents because people felt like there were decisions being made that were, money-driven or not in the best interest of, athletes who also were students, things like that. So it's a tough call. On the one hand, the presidents are the ones who are ultimately responsible for the decisions that are made. They decided to expand the season, for instance, to a 12th game. But on the flip side of that is they're very busy people. They just do not have time, for the most part, to follow the daily dealings of what's going on in college sports. And as you and I know, there's been a sea change from conference realignment to the playoff to a whole bunch of things that have just dramatically changed how college sports operate just in the last 3 years alone. And, it's very difficult to ask a college president to keep up with all that. I think ADs are the best equipped to do that. So frankly, I'm not sure what the solution is. I think that they're going to have some trouble finding the silver bullet just because it's a difficult situation. You're making decisions on behalf of universities whose goals as a whole are sometimes different from an athletic department, and that's always going to be the case.
Rachel, one last quick question. I want to put you on the spot. A short question here before we let you go. As we're sitting here getting ready to turn the calendar to November this weekend, getting to what's probably going to be another crazy November of football, as you're sitting here right now, what do you think, if you were to make a prediction on the first BCS school, not including Southern Cal, obviously, to having coaching change, what would your prediction, or who would you guess would be that team or that school?
The first?
Or right now.
Yeah, coming down the line here.
Yeah, as we're getting ready to move forward, who would be next?
Well, I mean, the obvious choice is Mac Brown. I think that he's he's a dead man walking, and he's an interesting question because he raises the question of whether you can win the conference championship and still be fired. That actually could happen with him.
I know.
And I think they're probably going to go to a bowl game, so he might not be the first one gone in the calendar year, but he's already kind of a dead man walking. And I think the only question is whether the new AD, whoever that ends up being, pulls the trigger or will kind of let it ride for another year. But I think clearly the fan base is not happy with what's happened with Texas football this year, and he's going to have to do something pretty dramatic to turn it around if he even still can.
All right, Rachel, we appreciate your time tonight. Tell our listeners where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find your work with the Wall Street Journal, and maybe give an idea of something that you've got in development right now.
Sure. My Twitter handle, as you mentioned, is BachScore, BACHSCORE. And you can go to the Journal website directly to /sports, so it's just WSJ.com/sports. And almost all of our sports content is free, so that's kind of nice. A lot of the rest of our content is not. It's behind a paywall. So, as far as things I'm working on, I'm not sure when some things are running, so I don't know if I can tip my hat just yet. But hopefully something interesting that y'all will want to read about.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Rachel. We appreciate it as always. And the holidays are staring us in the face. Hope everything's going well.
Thanks so much. You too. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Rachel.
Rachel Bachman, college football writer, college basketball writer, NCAA expert for the biggest name out there, the Wall Street Journal. And trust me, they're going to be watching what's going on finances-wise with all of this because it's all about money. If you hadn't figured this out, Price, it's all about money. We're going to end up with the 13th football game before all's said and done. Why? Because they can't afford to pass up on the money. All right, before we get out of here, we need to tell you about our good friends at Rogers Feed and Supply. That's right, Rogers Feed and Supply, those experts for dog food here in the upstate. I'm telling you, they carry only the best brands around that were made right here in the good old U.S. of A., and they got it for several dollars a bag, cheaper than you're going to find anywhere else. Brands like River Run, Victor, Pride, Loyal, not to mention their number one seller, the Wholesome Chicken and Rice, only $29.99 for a 40-pound bag. It is the absolute best nutrition that you can put in Fido's body. Deer hunters, they got you covered. I mean, everything from the popular Trophy Rocks to Antler Max deer feeds to 50-pound bags of whole corn for $9.99. Why? Because it's legal to feed and bait deer here in the upstate this year. Not to mention, guys, you better get down the grass seed here this weekend if it's time to reseed for the fall. Go in there and ask Jason Rogers in the gang. They'll give you the answers. They're experts at this. You're not talking about hourly waged employees that have to go ask the boss what the answer is. This is what they do. They're experts at Rogers Feed and Supply. Head by and see them at 1041 Easley Highway in Pelzer. All you got to do is go to exit number 32, go east 2 miles. As soon as you cross over the Highway 29 bridge, they're going to be immediately on the right. Their phone number is 947-6925. Don't forget to go like them on Facebook. Take part in their contest every week. On Friday, some lucky winners getting a 50-pound bag of dog food or livestock feed, whichever they need. That's Rogers Feed and Supply, again, located at 1041 Easley Highway in Pelzer. That phone number is 947-6925. Off to break we go. Final segment on the other side. This is Straight Up with Sturge, live on Talk Sports 104.9 FM, the flagship station of Clemson Athletics.
It's